Second player press start.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Second Player Press Start. My name is James and I'm joined by my friend
Darren, the guy on the couch. Hey guy on the couch.
Hey guy on the couch. And today we are going to talk about a very timely release. It was released way back in August of 2016. But the reason that we're kind of talking about it today is they've just released an update, which has overhauled a lot of the game, which I guess we'll have no clue of because we've only just played it now.
Truth.
But the game that we're talking about is No Man's Sky for the PlayStation 4. It's also available on PC, and it just came out on the Xbox One in time with this launch, or this huge patch that just kind of went live.
So it wasn't on Xbox before this patch then?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I guess with the launch of the Xbox version, they kind of souped up the game for that launch. There has been kind of a bit of a history with this game. I think it captured a lot of people's imaginations when they first kind of showed off the game. When the game released, they fell under a lot of criticism for it not really living up to what was kind of promised or what people thought the game would be. It seems like a very underdeveloped game, which I think made a lot of people angry. But I guess for the past 2 years now, they've been working away at kind of patching and updating this game to the point where they've just released this huge update that's added like multiplayer and a bunch of other stuff. Again, we don't really have a frame of reference because we've only played this kind of post-release update, and we haven't played the original kind of pre-patched game, which this patch they're calling No Man's Sky Next. So that's kind of an indication of the evolution of the game, I guess.
Sure.
I picked this up like a few months ago. It was like sub $10 in a bargain bin at EB Games.
Wow, yeah. For the amount of hype that I remember hearing about it 2-3 years ago now, to find that even for that cheap, just like I don't have a lot of context for the controversy or even for the game. I saw a trailer initially way back when, but to be like the game that I heard about way back then with everything that it said it was going to do, and a few years later it's in a $10 or less bargain bin, you're like, wow, obviously something happened here.
Yeah. And I picked it up solely. There was rumors floating around about this huge update, and one of the rumored things was they were going to add VR support, which even the base game in VR, like going from planet to planet in VR, would have been worth the $10 to me.
Sure.
So I bought it in hopes of a VR update, but no VR support yet, but I thought it would be a good time to kind of jump in, and we played almost 2 hours, right?
Yeah, like the recording that you do is about an hour long, and we had started a second one but didn't get to the end of that. So yeah, at least 90 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's a single player game, and you were the one with the controller this time around.
Yeah. So the game starts off in a planet that seems somewhat randomly generated based on, we did 2 kind of like fresh playthroughs just to see if there was any difference between kind of your starting point. And while the planet was different, the kind of scenario or things that you had to look for
Sure.
were similar. So it's in third person, which I think is new because I think the game launched in first person.
I couldn't speak to that.
I don't know if that's something you can toggle on and off. But yeah, so you're launched into this third person perspective in this kind of alien world, which is somewhat randomly generated, at least visually, with kind of the type of plants and animals that are kind of inhabiting the planet. And I will admit, and you'll probably see this if you're watching the YouTube version of this podcast, I kind of struggled at the beginning. We were kind of threatened with this radioactive threat.
Right.
At first it was kind of like a haze or a fog. The second playthrough that we did, it was this rain.
Yeah, acid rain, toxic rain. So both planets we ended up on, they looked maybe a little bit different, but generally they were very similar. At least the two starting planets were, because we started the game over a second time after dying. And in fact, when we started over the first time when we died, James was able to find his grave and then collect whatever gear he had left, but it was on the same planet. But it took him starting a new game to get to a new, maybe randomly generated planet. The thing is that, like he said, both scenarios were pretty much exactly the same. We've crash landed. We have no memory of where we came from or why we're here. And we're getting these prompts from our AI, who sounds very much like GLaDOS from Portal.
Portal, yeah.
And we're getting these prompts, not as sneaky though, not as sneaky as GLaDOS. And we're getting these prompts about the things that we need to accomplish, and it's pretty much collect these things to build this thing, or to repair your ship, or to find your ship, or to give you a scanner or whatever, so you can find where your ship is. And you're just kind of moving around this planet, or this small surface of the planet that you're on. I'm not sure how far you can travel by foot. It seemed to be a pretty large area that we covered, at least in our first playthrough. In our second one, I don't think we covered as much area, simply because we had a better idea of what we're supposed to be doing. But I don't know, you might want to speak more to like your feeling of the largeness of the space, because for me visually, I didn't see a lot of differentiation between those two first planets. Once we moved a little bit further in the game, I saw more differentiation. But
yeah, it was there wasn't a terrible difference between when we did the restart. We did later on then take off. We managed to kind of gather all of the items and resources that we needed to fix our ship, to then take off into space. And I think that's where the game kind of opens up a bit more kind of freeform.
Sure.
In terms of where you want to go and fly off to. I know one of the early criticisms of the game was there wasn't much of a story or a quest per se. And this first section was very guided, of like, you need to find these things to repair your ship or repair your mining tool. The problem is, it seemed like it threw a lot of stuff at you all at once.
Sure, and it did it in a way that wasn't very focused either. There was pop-up after pop-up after pop-up for everything. There was icons all over the place. Once you get into your inventory menu, it was that same feeling like when we hit the God of War menu after having a very focused experience. In this case, it wasn't focused at all, so it didn't surprise me that the menu would be crazy overwhelming.
Yeah, and it was weird that like some of the most like important text was this like really tiny font to the right of like your, like not even center, it was just kind of off to the side.
There's some difficult user interface decisions there that made it really challenging to know what we were supposed to do, where we were supposed to go, if there was any kind of like direction-oriented thing. It was more or less these icons that kind of appeared on the screen in the 3D space instead of on a HUD. So even sometimes turning in a direction to find it, you couldn't see it until you turned around, which made seeking and finding things difficult, but then knowing what those were in the first place was already difficult. And I think in addition to that, the fact that because of the radioactive or the toxic rain, whatever the atmosphere issue we were dealing with at the time, meant that we had this extra pressure on us to solve these problems as quick as possible, or we were going to die because we couldn't survive in that environment.
Yeah, I really didn't like when we were first playing, just that added sense of pressure of like trying to figure out on my feet, like, okay, what do I need to be doing here? But then having that kind of, it was almost like a time limit of like, here's a very poorly guided tutorial, but not only is that tough, but we're also going to throw, you have to do it in this time limit or otherwise you're dead.
Right.
That made it kind of tense, which I guess maybe that's what they might have going for. I think it just could have been done without that, like, ticking kind of time thing.
Right. I mean, when we first started the game, we had a choice of 4 options in terms of the play mode that we wanted to. There was normal, survival, permadeath, and then creative. And one of the comments you made just from reading some of those things, you thought, well, kind of almost feels like a Minecraft thing where it's just about crafting and building stuff and whatnot. Now, I didn't get that feeling in the game at all. Getting into that screen where we're picking, we chose the normal option. And I struggled to find the difference between what we were doing and what the survival mode was, because we
Surviving,
died. We died like 2 times. So I don't know. Like, I don't even know. It seemed to be pretty explicit that in normal mode, there was going to be these types of activities, and then survival mode that put more pressure on you, and that way then permadeath, you just start over and you don't get any of that gear, like you can't find your grave site and collect stuff. And then the creative mode, which did have words in there that made it feel like it was about building and like crafting things.
Right.
But having not tried those other options, I can't say what the difference was. But choosing normal, I have no idea now, thinking back to what those play modes are. Like, what is the difference between what happened with us versus the other play modes?
Like, permadeath kind of makes sense because it seemed like on normal, there were points like when you first discovered your ship, it created kind of a checkpoint.
Right.
And it kind of alerted you, hey, checkpoint saved or whatever. So, and I think even when we died in that first playthrough, we landed back to that kind of checkpoint. So my guess is permadeath would be like, once you die, that's kind of it.
Right.
Survival, I like, between the normal mode and survival, like, it seems like what we were doing was trying to survive.
Yeah. I'd almost have to go back and look at that screen again and read those options in more detail to figure out, now that I have some expectation of the game, what do these things really mean? And it's too bad, because we might have had a better game experience, I would argue, if we made sense of those things right up front. Right? Because my assumption was, picking normal, we weren't going to be dropped onto a planet where the radioactivity kills us in, 5-10 minutes? But before we then respawn and then do the same thing over and then die again.
Yeah. And
then we pick a new game to see if a new planet. And then, I mean, we weren't as close to death in the 3rd playthrough, but still, like, this is while we're still learning about, well, how do I move through the world? How do I figure out where to go, and how do I collect the things I need to collect? How do I craft the things I need to craft? So there's just so much overwhelming right at the beginning. And then again, the way that it's presented to you with the user interface is so poor that it makes it really hard to figure that out in a really concise, simplified way. And there's been other games out there that we've played. I'm thinking about the Flame in the Flood, something like that. But again, it's a survival game, but it very much has a focus. Like, you know what you're doing. And yes, there was some pop-ups in that where it was telling us certain things, but I felt like they were much clearer. There was like, front and center, this thing pops up, this is how you steer your raft, and then you move forward.
Right.
And this didn't have very much. This doesn't have anything like that.
Yeah.
Now, we talked again about survival games last time, about how some just drop you in and don't give you anything at all, like Don't Starve.
Yeah.
But it's really hard for me to look at this game and put it in the same boat as Don't Starve, just because of the breadth of content and the size of it, right? It seems that because simply that the scale is bigger, that almost like our expectations are far increased in terms of how we should be presented information. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. The way it handled some stuff, and you would think after like 2 years of like not only the time you had in developing the game, but after 2 years of kind of player feedback.
Sure.
But maybe they are listening to those players that, you know, have played this game up until now. But then again, they're launching it on the Xbox, which is a
new player base.
New player base that would presumably be like us, right? Like not really having any prior knowledge going into it fresh.
Yeah, kind of like a soft reset for the game, right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, this is our opportunity to kind of push the other controversy under the carpet and just kind of relaunch fresh and, you know, bring on some new people and maybe people that hadn't really heard about the game before and give it a shot. But if this is my first experience with it, I don't think, like, if I'm getting into it for the survival part of it, then I think there's better survival style games out there that are more compelling. If I'm getting into it for the exploration of the worlds, then starting up on this planet with this like death timer basically to get myself out of there or find safety or whatever, just so that I can then get into my spaceship and explore the entire galaxy, I feel like that whole opening sequence is kind of just unnecessary. I mean, sure, it gets you used to, you know, interacting with the environment, but if that part of it isn't as important to me as seeing all these new worlds, I don't know. It's hard to weigh those out, right?
Yeah.
I really like exploring as a player, and there wasn't anything here, in my opinion, that was just overly compelling in its style or its presentation or its feel. I think the only thing that I really liked was the music. And part of it is that I know the composers, I guess, the band 65 Days of Static. I've really liked their music going back for a long time now. So to hear their stuff in here from a different take on it has a little bit more of a science fiction feel, a little bit more spacey kind of stuff. But I do like their music. So I enjoyed that about this. It's hard to say how much it fit, though, honestly.
Yeah, I think, like, for me, overall, like, I kind of dug the like, vibe of the game. Like, I think the last planet that we landed on, or I guess the first planet beyond the initial planet.
Right. Paradise something or other.
Yeah, like, that had a really neat look to it. It was kind of like, I think you commented it was like Mars with trees, right?
Right.
And it had these kind of interesting creatures and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, like, I'm 99% sure that these planets are just randomly generated.
Sure.
Which we kind of encountered when we did the restart of that first playthrough. So, I mean, that kind of interests me. Like, I could see myself kind of hopping to a few planets just to kind of see how they differ.
Right.
But the whole, like, mining for stuff, like, it kind of falls back into the Flame and the Flood and State of Decay to a certain degree. Like, the whole thing of, like, collecting this item to then make this item to then make that item, but then you need this item
to
combine. Like, that kind of keeping track of inventory and managing
resource management. Sure.
Yeah, like, those aren't really my favorite type of games. I don't really find fun in that. I mean, we were kind of getting the hang of it probably after about an hour, it's like, okay, well, I need carbon to heal myself here, or I think it was the radiation suit,
Right.
to kind of charge that back up. So we were kind of learning, okay, well, we need this for this.
Right.
But then even just like finding parts for the ship, it's like, oh, well, you need this part. But it wasn't a matter of, okay, well, just finding this part. It was like, well, we need these 2 resources to create this part.
Right.
So it was kind of a layer upon layer of like finding things and crafting things, which if you're into that kind of stuff, like this will probably be your type of game. For me, that side of the game I didn't really dig. But I don't know like how much this game can sustain like going to different planets and kind of checking them out.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges I had overall is I didn't feel that there was just this really strong creative vision in the same way that some of the other games we've played. That, you know, this is a game that's supposed to do this thing and it's going to follow this particular character or this set of characters, or it's going to explore this kind of world or even explore this mechanic, right? This game mechanism. And I just felt in this that it didn't really have any of those things. If the one reason that you're making the game is can we procedurally generate an entire galaxy or universe, then you could look at that from a mechanism perspective, right? But it's almost more like a feature and not a core.
Right.
Does that make sense? Because they had a particular visual style, that, like lots of color, like everything was just bright, and I'm sure there's another game, I just can't think of it off the top of my head, that had that same kind of feel to it, where everything was just very colorful instead of in a certain palette, right? So it had some visual elements, but nothing in the visual element other than there being weird alien creatures or weird plants or whatever on these planets made it feel like a cohesive, like it was trying to convey any kind of feeling. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Just like it didn't feel like dark, it didn't feel like super happy, it didn't feel it just seemed bland, even though it was colorful and there was a lot of fun things to look at and it was interesting. It just felt bland to me.
Yeah.
I don't know, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think I would have to maybe explore a few more planets to just maybe see if that kind of holds true. Yeah, it's tough because I know I've seen some trailers of this game where it's shown like these giant animals and stuff, but we didn't really encounter any of that.
Right.
So it's tough with that. If it is procedurally generated, then like how much of that is just chance or luck that you may stumble on a planet that's actually well designed without being well designed because it's
right.
a random algorithm that's generating the planet, right?
Yeah, so we played 90-ish minutes, maybe closer to 2 hours, and nothing. I was excited when we got to the space station, but even getting there, it was just kind of this empty place, and there's a few of the same looking aliens standing around that you couldn't understand what they said. So maybe there's more to it than that. Maybe if there's some sort of translator tool that I could get, and then we can start interacting with other entities, or we're able to scan, or we're able to buy and trade. We started doing this trade system, but it was way too convoluted at first glance to figure out how it even worked. There's not really any explanation of it. So there's all these little elements that I can see that they're trying to make the game's scope huge. And that, to me, is a compelling idea. But if I can't find a through line for me personally, like, is it that I'm interested in this character story? Is it that I'm interested in, like, somehow getting to certain locations in the galaxy that would help me rekindle my memory, right? From the very beginning, we find out that this character doesn't have a memory of where he is or how he got there, and he's assuming this is his spaceship. And I'm saying his because the character's model seemed like a male just in the way it moved and was modeled. I mean, that's another challenge for me too, is like, why maybe from the first person perspective, you could assume that it was you, right? Like you could put yourself in that position, and then it didn't matter if you were, you know, what your race was, what your gender was, or anything, because you're imposing yourself on that avatar from the first person perspective. But as soon as it's third person, the figure definitely plays a role in the way that you see and experience that game. So if I'm trying to learn about this character's memory, for example, maybe that's my through line. Maybe when I get to certain locations, I learn more about who I am and where I've come from. But up to the amount that we played, I just didn't see anything like that, other than these features that would make it interesting for me to tinker around with. But maybe that's like Minecraft, right? Maybe it's just a larger scale Minecraft, and the ability to go from, instead of being on one world that you can build on hundreds of worlds that are all different and have different things to offer in terms of resources.
Yeah, I mean, have you played much Minecraft?
I've tinkered in it. For me, my creative work comes out in different versions than that. So, and same with you, right? And so I feel like because we do creative stuff in other capacities, Minecraft for me wasn't something that I was immediately excited about.
Yeah.
Now, if that's the case, then there could be people, if this is similar to Minecraft, then maybe there's people out there that are like, yeah, this game totally does it for me because it has these elements of what I like, and it adds these other features and other things that improve on that experience for me. So,
yeah, I mean, I've played a little bit of Minecraft just because my kids have been really into more the creative mode, where it's essentially virtual Lego. Like you can place down materials and build some pretty crazy stuff. But Minecraft, I mean, it feels more like a toy, like something that, like, it's very accessible and very kind of fun to place things. I don't know, like, a creative mode in this game would have that same feeling.
why is that?
Just because of, like, how serious or how the game doesn't, like, really convey, like, fun in the sense of building.
Yeah, okay.
So I'd be interested to see that creative mode, what that actually entails. Whether it gives you stuff to build bases or not, I don't know. If base building is even a part of the game.
Sure.
It's hard to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like Minecraft was more designed to be that kind of game. Or that kind of, I say toy, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, yeah. Like, the difference between the game and the toy is the way you interact with it and whether there's an objective or not. Yeah, I mean, because like you said, with Lego blocks, you have full creative potential to put together the thing in any way you want, and there's no right or wrong way to do it. Whereas in this game, clearly when we die, we've probably done something wrong, or we haven't accomplished something right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I get that.
Yeah, I think this game was just kind of lacking in the fun department. Like, I didn't really find... Like, I found it interesting, but I wasn't really, like, having fun.
Right.
Like, there was nothing that, like, kind of wowed me, or, like... I was kind of looking for that moment of, like, coming over a hill and discovering, like, a cool-looking settlement or something, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Or discovering, you know, an animal that looked really unique, but... there was nothing that I really found fun. Like, it felt like a chore to me.
Turning the studio light on.
What was kind of your sense in the terms of, like, I know you're watching me play, so it's a very different experience, but
Sure.
Would you find yourself having quote-unquote fun in a game like that?
So, it's such an easy question, and such a straightforward one, but it doesn't make it like easy to answer. I think that's a challenging question overall, just because, we start talking about what's your definition of fun, right? And I think different people have different definitions of that, but I agree when I talk about that through line that I was mentioning before, that's something that would draw me into playing this game. And some games can be fun. I guess I tend to gravitate towards engaging simply because there's some things that, there's some games that I've played that are really heavy in nature with the types of content that they're dealing with. And I wouldn't say that they're fun, but they definitely hold my interest, and it's something that I'm fully immersed in or fully engaged in. So I feel like there's some things about this that, from my explorer type personality, that I'd love to kind of take a peek through and see what options there are and see what worlds I could discover. But that wouldn't be enough to hold me, simply because on a more abstracted way of thinking about that, if I just saw pictures of some of these pre-generated worlds, then I'm kind of getting part of that out of it anyway.
Yeah.
In so many ways, like towards the end, once we got in our spaceship, there was a point where you just decided to go from one planet and then jump to another thing and then go to the space station. And in the last, 10% of our game, we explored more different locations than we had in the 90% before that, right?
Yeah.
Was that because you just wanted to see what was available? That's kind of the feeling that I got, and I get that.
Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted out of the game, was just kind of, I guess, that childhood dream of building your own spaceship and going off to space. And
Sure.
Kind of discovering different things. That's kind of what hooked me into the initial concept of No Man's Sky. Was just the sense of finding and discovering things. But I guess what, like you said, the hook or the the reason for doing these things, I don't think is really that compelling in this game. If it's a matter of just going to planets and scanning things and collecting things to make more things to collect more things, that's not really too fun for me or engaging, I guess.
Sure.
And the story kind of narrative thing seems very tacked on, that again, it's not really something that I really cared about. As far as finding why I'm here and why I've lost my memory.
Right.
It didn't really capture my imagination in that sense either.
Sure. Yeah. And I wonder if, going back to that discussion between game versus toy versus narrative, where those overlaps and, like a Venn diagram, is there a sweet spot amongst those things? Because any narrative that you might get out of Minecraft is emergent play, right? We have these systems that interact with each other, and night comes around, and then monsters come out at night.
For sure.
And you've built something that you can hide in or whatever, and that's all emergent. There's nothing given to you as a story in that. You make that story up for yourself. But a lot of people find that really compelling. And especially on the survival mode, I've seen my share of survival games over the years, and there's a lot of people that really like that, being in a different world or in a normal looking world. There was one recently called The Long Dark. I'm not sure if that has been released or if it's still in early access, but the basic idea is you're in northern BC kinda, and it's snowy, and how long can you survive with, hunting animals that are out there and find shelter and find food and stay warm, and that's it. The difference being, though, that because it's this one location, they can focus their the music and the visuals and everything to convey this feeling of being isolated in the woods, and also this contrast with the beauty of nature in that space. But I don't feel like, to me, that's the core in that game. But in this one, I don't, because there's so much variety. That's why I'm not seeing that through line.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for emergent gameplay. Like, you don't necessarily have to have a story. Even like open world games like Grand Theft Auto, right? Mm-hmm. I can spend hours just driving around and kind of navigating the world without doing any of the quests, and just kind of the wacky, fun things that happen kind of in between just exploring stuff. But yeah, when we spent that like 10 minutes just zipping to a few different other locations, when we landed there, it seemed like, okay, now something cool's gonna happen. But in the Mars Red Planet, it was, oh, okay, here are some more plants,
right,
and some more similar looking creatures. And in the space station, it was these void spaces with, a few people standing around, right, that seem to give you quests to go find more stuff.
Mm-hmm. So how does that differ then from your experience with, say, Grand Theft Auto? Is it just that the world seems less alive? Is that a way to say it? I mean, that it's not really a concise...
I think because like those worlds are designed and made to be interesting. Even when I think of something like the latest Zelda, Breath of the Wild.
Sure.
Even going from kind of place to place in that game, you would have these emergent gameplay moments that were just so much fun. But I think because someone had designed the world that, okay, over this hill we're going to have a little cave that when you go under here there's going to be some guys and there's going to be a chest.
Right.
Whereas I think because this game is, again, procedurally generated, it's not designed in a way that you'll discover unique, interesting things all the time.
Right. Sometimes you will, sometimes you won't.
Yeah. And I think in our case, we didn't really discover anything new or exciting.
Sure.
Other than maybe a shift in color. But that was kind of it, so...
Yeah, I'd argue too, at least from the visual perspective, that running through toxic rain or the radioactive atmosphere, it decayed the screen visuals so much that we couldn't even actually see in some positions the world that was presented to us, just because the atmosphere was toxic and there was green clouds or whatever of this gas. So it meant that whatever was procedurally generated, for the most part, was completely hidden from view. So even if there was one of these excellent vignettes, like we crest the hill and we see this, these 3 moons or something in the distance, we'd have never seen that anyway because of the way that it constructed the toxic haze or whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe there's aspects of that, again, like you're saying, the difference between procedurally generated algorithm versus a person or persons that are building something for a particular experience.
Yeah.
Is what gives one or the other.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I lean more towards a crafted experience than kind of a randomly generated one. But
yeah. I guess unless you're generating it yourself, right?
Yeah.
That's where the Minecraft thing comes
right.
in.
Very true. So do you think there's room for this game? Like, they've been working on this like 2 years post-release. Like, where do they go from here? Do you think they keep working on it? Do you think this is kind of a trend in games where like it's pretty crazy that 2 years after it's like they're still working on it, right?
Sure.
Usually that effort is kind of poured into a sequel. Like, do you think this is kind of a trend going forward that developers, like, because of the time and money invested in that initial idea, I mean, we're seeing it in a lot of games now where just that continued support
Right.
versus kind of scrapping it and starting a new thing. What's kind of your thoughts on that?
So to your first question about like a space for this game, I guess in the market, I think that there is, I guarantee there's people out there that really like this game, that find something really compelling about it, and that's awesome. Like, great, that means there's more opportunity for more diversity when it comes to game experiences, right? And I'll be the first to admit, like, there's games that really do it for me and there's ones that don't, and I know kind of what I'm looking for. I hope that I'm open-minded enough to try these new experiences and see what I feel like for myself and not shut them down without even giving them their shot. But when you consider that we've played, every game we've played, we've put about an hour, 90 minutes, maybe not 2 hours in every game we've played. But to the level we've put into this one compared to the other ones, I could tell you, like, I could automatically put this lower on the list from a bunch of other ones we've played to say that this is the one I'm going to put more time into. And they're for the reasons we've been talking about. As far as the idea of support and things, I think that really comes down to their business model, right? Like, if they're supporting people like you who are going to pick it up in a, for $10 and try it out and maybe not get so much out of it, like, that's not sustainable. That doesn't seem sustainable to me, right? So does that mean then that they're instead putting the support in to offset the nonsense of their launch, right? Like
Right.
The critique and what's the word I'm looking for? The controversy around their launch. Are they putting in this time simply to assuage that, like to hold that controversy at bay and to say, yes, we're still behind this, we're still doing the best we can, we're still, we still want to support the players, that kind of thing. That seems reasonable, but that is, again, that's not sustainable because people have already paid this money, and if you're not getting a new player base on a game you're continually supporting and the new player base is paying $10 for it, I still don't think that's sustainable. Now, that said, I don't know how big the development team is behind something like this. If their systems were built already, like the procedurally generated world, and it's just about the UI part of it, like how do we interact with it, then maybe it's a small team that's continually supporting it.
Right. Yeah, I know it was, I think it was Hello Games. They're a really small studio. And I think, like, because I think Sony kind of partnered with them in the beginning, I think they kind of made more out of this game than maybe it should have. Like, maybe if it was positioned as like just a downloadable kind of game that you would expect to have kind of continued support, I think people may have been, like, initially kind of wrapped their heads around that.
Right.
Or even if it was launched as like an early access kind of thing, where then the community kind of puts their input in.
Yeah.
And it feels like it's kind of a product of the studio and the people that are passionate about it. Versus, this came out on a disc for $60 when it first came out, right?
Sure.
But if it had launched as like a $20 to $30 downloadable title,
right,
maybe the perception of this game would have been curbed a little bit at the beginning.
Yeah, I think that you raise a really good point there. I think that's because all that happened with the controversy, for what I understand, is that it didn't meet the expectations that whatever marketing hype or whatever had set for it. And if that marketing wasn't there in the first place, and it was just this thing that somebody found and then told somebody else about it, and it grew like some of the smaller indie titles do, which, if it is a small team, like you're saying, then it is a small indie title. Maybe without that marketing push, we would have a totally different experience of this game, because we're like, hey, there's this, here, check out Minecraft. You know what I mean? Now, Minecraft has grown because of the game first,
But it started off like very small, and then it grew into this large monster. Whereas I feel like this game was kind of pitched as this large monster, but it should have been kind of this smaller thing.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I definitely give them their props for kind of continuing their work on it. Who knows, maybe in another 2 years this game will be completely different. Who knows?
Sure.
I mean, it's sad that, I did pick this up for $10, and that was a used copy too, so they didn't even really see any money off of it as well, right?
Right.
So maybe they're just kind of doing this to save face. Maybe after this update, they're kind of wiping their hands clean and
that's possible.
Stepping away from it. But I guess maybe they'll see once if there's a bit more support there from their community, if they'll keep going.
Yeah.
But yeah, unfortunately, I didn't find it like it wasn't too engaging for me. I don't know if I would go back to it.
Right.
I might try that creative mode. I might see if the creative mode just kind of lets you fly around for a little bit. I think my kid would probably get a kick out of just kind of sitting next to me, and we'll go explore some planets.
Yeah.
And if that VR mode ever comes, I think
I could see that too, for sure.
Yeah, just exploring in VR would be really neat. Because there was something about being in that spaceship and kind of flying around at warp speed and stuff.
Yeah.
That I found it fun. But yeah, do you have any last words, or do you think we've kind of covered?
Not really. I think, like, just to reiterate, but this is one of the games so far that we've played that even holding it up against Fusion Frenzy, but even that game was like, no, seriously though, but even that game was like, this is what this game is about. This is like the core essence of this game. And they didn't deliver on that 100%, right? And it wasn't the best game I've ever played that had that same core concept. But I feel like this one's missing the heart. I don't know how else to say it. And it's just about the feature. It's just about the procedurally generated world, and look at all these different places you can go to. I don't know. It's unfortunate. And I think...
So if you were on a desert island with a choice of one game...
I'm not saying it would be Fusion Frenzy. But I'm also not saying it would be this. I don't know. The choice of one game is a tough one. I'd probably play something that had...
No, but if you only had Fusion Frenzy or No Man's Sky.
Or No Man's Sky, gotcha. Well, it's funny that you put it that way, because I would probably, on a long term, especially solo play, assuming nobody else is on this island with me, I would get more out of No Man's Sky.
Yeah.
Because just the exploration aspect of it means that there's more things that I can learn for the first time or experience for the first time. And that to me is more of a compelling idea than just rehashing mini games.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess if you compare the hour of Fusion Frenzy that we played to the hour plus of No Man's Sky, like, as dumb as Fusion Frenzy was, I had more fun playing that and more enjoyment than I did with No Man's Sky, but I guess we'll leave it.
We'll leave it at that, yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, if you can find this somewhere for super cheap, I think it's worth a look. I would definitely not pay $60 for it even after this update.
And who knows, maybe 3 hours in, 6 hours in, you're like, now we're getting somewhere.
Yeah.
And some games have a longer ramp-up period, right? It's just, like you said, with the amount we played of this compared to the other games we've played, the same amount of time, there's less to offer in that first experience.
So maybe a rental if people do rentals anymore, or a trial or something. I know those kind of pop up once in a while. But I think even watching some footage online, you'll get a sense of if this game's kind of for you or not. So, yeah, it wasn't really for us, but who knows, maybe it'll be for you. Yeah, so I think that'll wrap up this episode of Second Player Press Start. As always, if you're listening to this, we have a YouTube channel. You can just search for us there. We should pop up. And if you're watching us, you can then subscribe to a audio podcast version, which if you go to anywhere that has podcasts, and again, search for us, we should pop up.
Indeed. Yeah.
And if that's too complicated, then just head over to our website, secondplayerpressstart.com.
Yeah, and that's second with the number 2 and then ND, secondplayerpressstart.com.
You know, I should really buy just second, like spelling it out, so we don't have to say that every time. But yeah, I mean, we'll take that you're smart enough to kind of figure out how to get this in the other format if you wish to do so.
Oh, definitely. Our audience are the most beautiful, talented, smart people I've ever come in contact with.
Yeah. So with that said, it is very late here. And so, like always, say goodnight, Darren.
Good night, James.